history video, and today I got the 1952 presidential election, which was held between Dwight D. Eisenhower and the Democrat was Adlai Stevenson. However, in this scenario, I got the running mates of both candidates. Richard Nixon, who was the running mate of Eisenhower and was a senator from California at the time, and then John Sparkman, who I believe was a senator from Alabama, and he ran as Adlai Stevenson's running mate. And so, like I said, I got these two as the nominee. Like I said, the running mates of both of the actual candidates. And Nixon, like I said, both these guys were both senators, and Nixon did run in the 1960 election after becoming vice president. In this election in '56, reelected and lost to Kennedy kind of narrowly. But in this alternate scenario, I do got Nixon if he was a Republican nominee in '52 against the actual Democratic VP nominee John Sparkman. And I could see probably this scenario being pretty similar to the actual one. Uh, Truman, the incumbent president, Democrat, his popularity had gone down around this time, and because of the Korean War, and I think there was a bit of a recession too. And like I said, his popularity went down because of that. It was even a miracle that he won in 1948. He was expected to lose to Dewey that year, but managed to pull it off despite his approval ratings going down. But his approval ratings definitely dipped after that around this time in '52, so it definitely helped Eisenhower. And Eisenhower was also already a popular military general, the Supreme Allied Commander in World War II. So that definitely helped him, his military background experience. Made him a popular figure, so he was able to carry it into this election and win it. However, like I said, I got Nixon as the Republican, the running mate of Eisenhower. And I could probably say it's been pretty similar because of Truman's unpopularity. And John Sparkman was a conservative Democrat, essentially a Dixiecrat. So I could see his appeal definitely being in the South, but elsewhere, I think Nixon would pretty much dominate and win the same places that Eisenhower did. But anyway, getting into it, I think Nixon is definitely going to take his home state of California, where it's less populated back then. I think he won that comfortably, as well as Oregon and Washington, the whole West Coast there. He did win in his actual runs. Well, besides '68, I believe he lost Washington to Humphrey, but of course the Vietnam War was going on that year, and Humphrey definitely galvanized a lot of vote in Washington because of the anti-war sentiment. But I think in this scenario in 1952 that Nixon would win Washington against Sparkman since he was a conservative Democrat. And I think Nixon would take these Mountain West states, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and Utah. A lot of Mormon population there. I don't think they'd be too keen on going for Sparkman, and they did vote for Eisenhower, so I think Nixon would take them, as well as the rest of the states, Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico. These states were less populated back then, more rural, so I think Nixon would hang on to them with no problem, as well as the Great Plains, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, uh, Oklahoma, and Texas, however, I think would be close. So I believe they were won by Eisenhower. I know Oklahoma wasn't. I believe he actually did win Texas, but I think it would be closer in this scenario with Sparkman on the ticket being a conservative Southern Democrat. So I'll come back to those. These Midwestern states, they go for Eisenhower. He had a great appeal with labor unions and great appeal statewide, rural areas, and like I said, with unions and white working class folks in the states. So, and with Sparkman being a conservative Southern Democrat, I think Nixon would still win these because I don't see him having an appeal with labor unions. I think Nixon would do better in these states. And Eisenhower did win Minnesota, doing good in the suburbs and rural areas. So I think Nixon could do the same because Sparkman, I don't see him having that appeal being a Southern conservative Democrat. I think Nixon would do well in the suburbs like Eisenhower and take the state. Iowa was another state more rural, and I think Nixon did pretty good with farmers. I could say it'd been pretty close to Sparkman being on the ticket, but I think since Eisenhower was able to pull it off, Nixon would too. I think Nixon would take Illinois, doing good in Chicago, probably winning. I'm pretty sure because I don't think Sparkman would do too well there. Being a conservative Democrat and doing pretty good in rural areas, but I think Sparkman would probably do better in the rural areas. But I say Nixon pulling off Illinois because of Chicago and the collar counties. I see him do one in Indiana. I can see that one kind of being close, but Indiana tended to be a more Republican state around the time and still is today. So I think Nixon could pull it off because of Indianapolis and the suburbs in the state and doing pretty well in rural areas. Uh, the state of Missouri, I think, did go for Eisenhower, but I believe it was a close one. So I'm going to check that, see what the margin was. So yeah, this one was definitely a close one, as you see there. It was decided by at least a point or less. I could see this one going either way. I could say Sparkman maybe pulling it off because I think it could run it up in rural areas. But I could see Nixon doing pretty good in them too and doing good in the cities in the state. So I think this one would probably be a toss up. But since Eisenhower was able to pull it off, maybe Nixon would too. But I see that one kind of going either way, honestly. But I think since Eisenhower was able to pull it off, barely Nixon could too. But I could definitely see that one maybe flipping. But I'm not really sure on that one. But I think Nixon would pull it off since Eisenhower did. These deep South states, however, I think are going to stick with Sparkman since they do go for Adlai Stevenson, especially his home state of Alabama, where Sparkman was a senator. I think he win that overwhelmingly, as well as Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana states that went for Stevenson. Like I said, Sparkman was a conservative Democrat, and he definitely had a great appeal in these states, deep South, as well as Georgia. A lot of rural areas, I believe, would heavily go for Sparkman, so I see him pulling that off. South Carolina, I believe, went for Stevenson too, if I'm not mistaken, but I'm going to check that. So yes, it did, and North Carolina went for him too. So I'm pretty sure it would stick with him in this scenario. Like I said, all these southern states, because Sparkman was from Alabama. Um, the state of West Virginia, I believe, went for Stevenson, as West Virginia was more working class and Democrat back then. Democrats did well with the coal mining industry in the state, so I think Sparkman could hang on to it, having a southern conservative appeal in the state. Kentucky was another state, a border state that went for Stevenson, having its rural appeal, but it was a close one, as you see there. But I think since Stevenson was able to win it, that Sparkman could do the same and even do better being a conservative Democrat from Alabama. Tennessee was a state, however, another close one, but it did barely edge out Eisenhower, which is pretty impressive. But like I said, it was a close one, just like Kentucky, as you see there. Of course, Eisenhower did better in the eastern part, which was typically more Republican back then, while the western part was more Democratic, as you see there. But I could see Sparkman pulling it off, being from neighboring Alabama, and like I said, being a conservative Democrat. I could see him pulling it off against Nixon in this scenario. Virginia, however, would be a close one. I did go for Eisenhower because he did good in the suburbs and did do pretty good, like in the western part over here and some of the rural areas. But of course, Stevenson did well in rural areas too, as you see there. But Eisenhower was able to run it up in the suburbs, the northern part. So I think for that reason, Nixon could pull it off, but I think it would be a narrow one as a Sparkman Southern appeal. Uh, some of these northeastern states did all go for Eisenhower, so I think Nixon would do the same, like Pennsylvania, because I believe he did well in the suburbs around Philly. But Sparkman could do pretty good, I guess, in some of the rural areas. But I'm gonna look exactly and see how good each candidate did. So as you see, Adelaide did good, like in Western PA, but Eisenhower did better elsewhere, like I said, the suburbs and a lot of the other rural areas, Central PA. So I think Nixon would do the same. I think Nixon would take New York as Eisenhower did, and like I said, Sparkman being a conservative Democrat from the South, I don't think would do too well in these northeastern states. And as you see there, Nixon's over the top now, but for the rest of them, I think Nixon would take Vermont and New Hampshire, as they were very Republican and rural back then. So I see him hanging on to him, as well as the state of Maine. I do see Nixon taking the rest of the Northeast here since Eisenhower did. Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland. Like I said, Sparkman, just being from the South there and being conservative, I don't think would do too well in these northeastern states. So I see Nixon taking them with ease. And this just leaves the state of Ohio, Oklahoma, Texas, and Florida. Ohio, I believe, went for Eisenhower. It's historically been a swing state. And Eisenhower actually did win by a significant margin, as you see there. 56-43. He did well statewide in a lot of rural areas. He did pretty good in the northeastern part, but Stevenson did decent there too. However, because of the margin, Eisenhower won about running up in the rural areas and some of the suburbs. I think Nixon would take it. Uh, Florida here, I believe, was won by Eisenhower. Stevenson did well in the Panhandle, which was more Democratic back then, but has now been more Republican today. As you see there, like I said, Stevenson did good in the Panhandle. It was a 10-point margin, however, because Eisenhower did better in Central Florida and Miami-Dade. So I think for that reason, Nixon could pull it off. But I could see it getting closer because of Sparkman being on the ticket. I say Sparkman definitely doing great in the Panhandle like Stevenson did, but I think because of the Central and Southern Florida margins that Nixon could hang on to it since Eisenhower won it pretty substantially. And Oklahoma and Texas, I believe, are definitely going to be close because of Sparkman's rural appeal. Texas, like I said, actually was won by Eisenhower. He did go like in the suburbs in the state and did pretty well in some of the northern areas of the state, rural parts. But Stevenson did better in this western part over here. I could see this one definitely being close still, but I think Sparkman could pull it off because he is from the south here. Like I said, he's from Alabama, so I could see him running up the margins in the rural areas, and I think it would be enough for him to win it against Nixon in this scenario. Because I don't see Nixon being as strong as Eisenhower in certain parts. Eisenhower and his military background definitely helped him. But I think with Eisenhower being off the ticket, not the nominee, I think Sparkman could pull it off. And being from the South, I think would be enough. And it just leaves the state of Oklahoma, which I think would be another close one. It was won by Eisenhower. It was by a pretty significant margin, however. I could see it narrowing up because you see Stevenson did better in the southern part of the state. And I think Sparkman could do the same. However, Eisenhower did better in the northern parts and panhandle of the state. As I say, there was a pretty significant margin. So I could say Nixon hanging on to it, but I could see that one getting a little closer. With Sparkman being on the ticket. But it's not enough for Sparkman as Nixon still wins a landslide 407 to Sparkman's 124. So pretty similar to the actual election, just with like Tennessee flipping and Texas. Other than that, Nixon wins all the other states that Eisenhower did as expected. Because, like I said, Sparkman being that conservative Democrat from the South, that's where his strength would be. But Nixon elsewhere, I think, would win like Eisenhower did because of Truman's unpopularity and the Korean War. Like I said, the economy going down at the time. I think Nixon would still win because of, like I said, Truman's unpopularity. It would be enough. And so, like I said, there's the map 407 to 124. Thanks for watching. Comment what you think of this, if you agree or not. Thank you for watching. Subscribe, hit the bell if you haven't, and I'll see you next.